They tried to evict me from my own ranch, not knowing the very ground their HOA building sat on belonged to me. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just poured another cup of coffee, watched them walk off, and smiled. Because some battles are won with patience and paperwork. You want to know how we got here? Pull up a chair. This one's gonna burn. At 6:47 a.m., I was still in my thermal socks, halfway through my first cup of coffee when a knock at my front gate set off the perimeter chime. I looked through the camera feed and almost spit my coffee. There he was, a tall guy in a cheap suit and square-to shoes, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind him stood two others, one of whom was unmistakably Karen Simmons. Even from 50 yards away, I could spot those oversized sunglasses she wore like a crown, even though the sky was overcast. I stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, robe still tied lopsided, and called out, "You lost or just practicing for the census?" The clipboard guy raised his voice like he was talking to a delinquent teenager. "Mr. Moore, you've been served. 7 days to vacate this property. Sunridge Hills HOA board directive." I blinked, took a long sip of coffee, and said, "You want to run that by me again?" The guy puffed up, cleared his throat, and said, "You're in violation of multiple HOA regulations. Unapproved fencing, livestock exceeding residential limits, offensive barn coloration, and the installation of solar panels without energy compliance certification." Karen smiled like she'd just won prom queen. "We voted on it last month. You're officially part of the HOA now. Welcome to the neighborhood." I just stood there, silent, like a cowboy staring down coyotes. I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "Interesting. I'll look into it." They took that as a victory and turned back toward their SUV, one of them already scribbling into a notebook like he was writing an Oscar speech. Now, here's the part they didn't know. My property wasn't in the HOA, never had been. And more importantly, the shiny new clubhouse they were holding all their meetings in, that sat on land I owned, a 5-acre slice I had bought years ago for future horse trails, a forgotten patch they assumed belonged to their developer. Their title company must have skipped a page because I had the deed notarized and bulletproof, locked in a fireproof safe not 10 feet from where I was standing. But I didn't tell them that, not yet, because sometimes the best way to handle a land grab isn't with fists or yelling, it's with patience and paperwork. I stood there for another minute, watching their SUV bump down the gravel road, Karen's sunglasses still visible through the rear window like some kind of HOA periscope. I took one last sip of coffee, savoring it like it was the last moment of peace I'd get for a while. Then I turned back into the house, flipped open the safe, and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in over a year. The original deed, maps, even the utility easements, all marked in my name. I ran a thumb across the embossed seal like it was a badge. If they wanted war, they'd pick the wrong cowboy. I didn't come to Silver Creek to fight with clipboards and bylaws. I came here for the quiet, for the land, for the chance to rebuild after years of service. But when someone tries to take what's yours and does it with a smile and a pamphlet, that's not just a land dispute, that's a declaration. So I poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and started outlining my next move. Not to defend myself. No, that part was already settled. My goal was different, make sure they'd never forget who actually owned the ground they were standing on. The deed sat on my table like a loaded weapon, silent but ready. I stared at it while the sun inched higher over the ridgeline, lighting up the frost still clinging to my pastures. Most folks move out to Silver Creek to escape HOA nonsense, not walk straight into its crosshairs. I came here for the quiet, the space, the ability to hear my own thoughts without someone telling me my driveway gravel wasn't community compliant. But apparently, that was too much for Karen Simmons and her clipboard cavalry. I sip my coffee slower now, calculating. They thought they could roll in, redraw some lines on a plat map, and slap rules on land that didn't belong to them. That kind of arrogance didn't come from power. It came from never being told no. When I first bought the ranch, there was nothing out here but open sky, mule deer, and the occasional lost FedEx guy. 50 acres of scrub and promise. I cleared out the brush, rebuilt a weather-beaten barn, planted blackberry rows, and brought in 2 Appaloosas named Duke and Clementine. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The HOA didn't exist back then. No vinyl fences, no rule books disguised as welcome packets, just land. The peace lasted almost 2 years, until developers started carving up the valley like a Sunday roast. Overnight, Silver Creek went from frontier to fantasy suburbia. Sunridge Hills HOA formed as soon as the model homes went up, and I swear Karen Simmons was born in pearls, clutching a copy of Robert's Rules of Order like it was scripture. At first, they left me alone. I was technically outside the subdivision border, had a separate entrance, my own private well, and my tax parcel didn't even match theirs. But once Karen got voted HOA president unopposed, of course, that's when the letters started. The first was friendly, a suggestion that I repaint my barn to better reflect the tones of the community. Then came the livestock limits, a request to reduce hoofed animals to no more than 4 per parcel. They even claimed my solar panels violated community lighting aesthetics. I ignored all of it naturally, which in hindsight was the exact thing I should have done, and also the exact thing that made me a personal project. Karen began showing up at the edge of my property line, standing just outside the fence with a phone angled toward my barn like she was filming for a reality TV show called Fixing the Undesirables. Sometimes she'd bring backup, 2 men in tucked-in polos holding printouts and pointing at things like they were trying to summon demons with a measuring tape. One morning, I found a note in my mailbox that read, "You may want to consider voluntary compliance. Things go easier for those who do." No signature, just that. The tone had shifted. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a warning wrapped in smiley face formatting. That's when I installed high-res cameras across the property, not to catch wildlife, to catch Karens. Of course, the real kicker came when I traced a drone hovering over my back paddock one evening. Tiny, silent, but unmistakably equipped with a camera. It dipped low over the fence line, then zipped off toward the model homes like it had completed a mission. I stood there in the dusky light, holding a hay fork, staring at the sky, wondering just how far they were willing to go. And right then, a thought hit me like a hammer to the sternum. This wasn't just overstepping, it was escalation. And Karen Simmons wasn't just nosy. She was preparing for something bigger. I just didn't know yet. The next time she'd show up, she wouldn't be filming, she'd be cutting locks. The next time I saw her, she wasn't holding a phone, she was holding bolt cutters. 3 days after the drone incident, just as the morning fog was lifting off the fields, my perimeter alert pinged. I pulled up the live feed, expecting a deer or maybe a curious coyote, but there she was, Karen Simmons, standing at my front gate with 2 other HOA enforcers in tow. One was the same clipboard guy from before, now wearing a reflective HOA vest like he was about to direct traffic at a middle school fundraiser. The other man, taller, red-handed, with a neck sunburnt raw, held a set of industrial bolt cutters like he'd just bought them from a villain's starter kit. I watched in disbelief as Karen pointed to the padlock on my gate, said something I couldn't hear, and the redhead stepped forward and snapped it clean in two like he was opening a can of soda. I didn't even grab a jacket. I stormed out the door, my flannel shirt and booze, phone in one hand, live camera feed in the other. My voice was already rising as I marched across the gravel. "You just cut my lock?" Karen turned, completely unfazed, and smiled like I'd just invited her to brunch. "Mr. Moore," she said coolly, "you failed to respond to our compliance warnings. As per HOA guidelines, we've initiated a surprise inspection." I stopped about 10 feet from them, body blocking the path to my barn. "You're not just trespassing," I said, lifting the phone toward him. "You're committing felony B and E, and I've got the whole thing on camera." The redhead froze, clipboard guy shifted uncomfortably, but Karen, she just tilted her head and replied, "You're overreacting." The call to the sheriff's office had already gone through. Deputy Warren Owens answered on the second ring, and I made sure he could hear every word as Karen kept talking. She rambled about community jurisdiction, emergency response protocols, and some nonsense about property access in non-compliant situations. I swear she sounded like she'd swallowed a legal thesaurus printed in HOA font. Owens told me to hold tight, not to engage, and units were on the way. Karen's smugness cracked just a hair at that. She adjusted her sunglasses, took a half step back, but still wouldn't leave. "We're not here to cause trouble," she said, voice syrupy sweet and full of crap. "Just doing our job." 10 minutes later, 2 patrol SUVs pulled up with lights flashing. Karen tried to intercept the deputy before they could speak to me, launching into a diatribe about willful obstruction and non-conforming aesthetic aggression, but Deputy Owens raised a hand like a teacher silencing a rowdy kid. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "this property is not under HOA jurisdiction. You have no legal authority to be here, and based on video evidence, this is unlawful entry." The redhead started sweating bullets. Owens asked for IDs. Karen hesitated, then practically hissed out her information. All three were issued citations and warned, return again and they'd be arrested. Karen stomped off toward her luxury SUV like a toddler, denied a second juice box. I didn't feel satisfied. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something colder, a switch flipping in my gut. This wasn't just neighborly overreach or HOA power tripping. This was targeted, personal. And if they were bold enough to cut a lock and stroll onto my ranch like it was a curated lawn exhibit, then the next move wouldn't be so polite. That night, as I reinstalled the new steel lock on my gate, I kept catching myself looking over my shoulder, wondering when the next shoe would drop. What I didn't know was that it wouldn't be a shoe. It would be a flare. 3 nights later, the flare came just past 2 a.m., when the world should have been asleep and horses should have been dreaming of green pastures. Instead, I woke to a different kind of sound, not the usual creak of old wood or Brutus barking at shadows. No, this was sharper, panicked whinnies from the barn and the unmistakable pop hiss of something burning. I shot out of bed barefoot, grabbed the fire extinguisher I kept by the door, and bolted outside. The night air hit me like a slap dry, electric, and laced with smoke. Orange flickers danced along the side of my hay shed, just where the stack of alfalfa touched the corner wall. Someone had thrown a flare, probably military grade, definitely intentional. The beam of my flashlight caught the casing half buried in the dirt. No raccoon did this. This was human. I managed to contain the fire before it ate through the main structure, but it was close, too close. The horses were spooked, stomping and snorting in the paddock. Clementine had scraped her flank against the stall trying to escape. I calmed them as best I could, then called the sheriff. Deputy Owens showed up with another unit just before dawn. I walked them through everything, where the fire started, the flare casing, the camera angles. Thank God I'd installed full perimeter coverage. One camera caught movement behind the tree line. A figure in dark clothes crouched low, carrying what looked like a gas can. No face, no license plate, but enough to prove intent. Owens looked grim. This wasn't vandalism, he said. This was planned. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. That morning, I moved the horses to a friend's ranch 30 miles away. It damn near broke my heart to see Duke loaded into the trailer, eyes wide and uncertain. But I wasn't taking chances. Next, I installed 2 new floodlights, upgraded the motion sensors, and ordered 3 more cameras. Thermal, not just infrared. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with a shotgun across my lap and a mug of stale coffee that never made it to my lips. Not because I was afraid. No, I'd stared down worse in desert war zones. But because something inside me was done hoping they'd stop. This wasn't about fences or barns anymore. Someone wanted me gone, and they weren't subtle about it. The following day, I drove straight to Denver to meet with Clara Jennings, my lawyer. Former JAG, tough as nails, no patience for theatrics. I laid out everything, videos, photos, the flare casing, even the HOA notices. She leafed through it like she was flipping a dossier in a war room. We're way past nuisance law, she said. This is criminal. If we can link this to any HOA board member, we bury them. I told her I didn't want revenge. I wanted it to stop, publicly, permanently. She nodded once. We start with cease and desist, then we escalate. She leaned back in her chair. But if we can trace that fire to Karen's crew, it becomes arson, attempted destruction of property, maybe even attempted harm. As I left her office, she handed me a fresh manila folder and said, start logging everything, every note, every drone, every creepy HOA member in beige polos. I drove home with that folder in the passenger seat like it was a live grenade, and when I got back, there was something waiting for me, pinned to my gate with a thumbtack, a piece of paper typed no signature, just 12 words. You should have left when you had the chance. This isn't over. I stared at it for a long time, not out of fear, but because I finally understood this wasn't just a turf war, this was a siege, and I was done playing defense. The note stayed pinned to my memory longer than it did to my gate. I took it down, slid it into the new evidence folder Clara gave me, and spent the rest of that evening reinforcing every inch of my property like I was fortifying a forward operating base. I swapped out the old gate with a steel one, double latch with anti-tamper bolts, installed motion sensors, not just on the fence line, but in the trees behind the barn. Floodlights now covered every blind spot. Brutus, my dog, was already at my brother's place with the horses, but I left a recording of his bark on loop, triggered by motion, just for good measure. By the time the moon rose, I was done waiting. They wanted a reaction. Instead, I gave them a fortress. I hadn't even brewed coffee the next morning when I heard a knock at the door. Not the usual thud, but a polite, measured tap. When I opened it, Greg Powell stood on the porch, cap in hand. Greg had been living in Sunridge Hills for a few years, quiet guy, retired surveyor, Vietnam vet, never got involved with HOA politics. I used to see him wave from the road when he passed, always respectful. Got your letter, he said simply, nodding toward the mailbox. Also saw the flames the other night. I invited him in, poured him a cup, and let him take his time. He pulled out a thick binder, the kind that smells like old paper and quiet warnings. Inside were detailed land surveys, original plat maps from before the development was even approved. Greg pointed to the boundaries. That clubhouse? They built it on land that was never theirs. It's part of your parcel, always has been. The developer never filed for easement. They just assumed. He flipped to a printed email next. It was from Karen's personal HOA address. Subject line, removing the obstacle. The body of the email was short, but damning. If legal doesn't work, maybe Gary can look into other options. He has contacts, discretion advised. My mouth went dry. Where'd you get this? I asked. Greg sipped his coffee, calm as ever. Had a friend in the committee's IC before Karen ran them out. He pulled a few things before the server wipe. Wasn't going to say anything until someone tried to burn down your barn. He slid over another document, a copy of a transfer, $5,000, 0 cents wired from a discretionary HOA fund to a personal account labeled under a shelled company. Greg tapped the line. That's Gary, the bolt cutter guy. They paid him. I sat back in my chair, stunned but not surprised. The pieces had been there, just waiting for the right lens. Now I had motive, method, money trail, and a witness. Why are you helping me? I finally asked. Greg's eyes didn't blink. Because I used to believe in HOAs. Thought they were about keeping lawns neat, neighbors friendly, but Karen, she's not about order, she's about control. And you? He pointed at me. You've been the only one who didn't bow. That scares her. He stood to leave, then added, you're not alone in this, Ethan. You just needed someone to say it out loud. After Greg left, I sat for a while at the kitchen table, binder open, emails staring back at me like accusations. The weight of what I held wasn't lost on me. This wasn't just petty power grabs and clipboard wars anymore. This was conspiracy. I scanned the copies, forwarded them to Claire within the hour. Her reply came fast and cold. We go nuclear, civil and criminal. Start prepping. I closed the binder, but before I could even stand, a ping hit my phone. Motion alert, north fence. I tapped the feed and saw it, a single figure standing just outside the range of the floodlights, shoulders square, arms crossed, watching. Karen. She didn't move, just stood there, a shadow at the edge of reason. Then she turned and disappeared into the dark. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The message was loud and clear. She knew I had something, and she was deciding what to burn next. After that night, everything tightened like a coiled spring. I didn't sleep. Not really. I'd close my eyes and see that silhouette of Karen at the tree line, standing like some villain in a straight-to-streaming thriller. Claire was already building our case, but lawsuits take time, and Karen didn't strike me as the type to wait for a courtroom verdict. I reinforced the camera network, upgraded to cloud backups, and started running silent perimeter drills with motion sensor flares that triggered a photo burst every 3 seconds. Paranoid? Maybe. But after someone tries to barbecue your barn, you earn the right to be a little twitchy. I made one more call. Actually, 4. Old friends from my Army days. Retired like me, bored out of their minds, and more than willing to trade city noise for fresh air and a purpose. Within 48 hours, my guest rooms were full. Wyatt, Diaz, Big Tim, and Harper. None of them HOA members, but all of them experts in surveillance, security, and making sure things didn't go boom. We didn't advertise our presence. We didn't patrol in broad daylight. We became ghosts in camo hoodies and trail shoes, moving through the mesquite like rumors. We planted tripwires, set up pressure pads, and ran night vision checks every 2 hours. And just like clockwork, on the 3rd night, someone tested the system. It was 2:42 a.m. when the alert hit my phone. Motion detected North Fenceland. I tapped into the live feed, and there he was. One figure, low to the ground, crawling like a man who thought tall grass could hide sins. He had a jerry can in one hand and a flashlight with a red filter in the other. Wyatt was already in position behind the generator shack, whispering updates into our walkie like we were clearing a compound. Target approaching, fuel unit, no backup visible. Do not engage until trap confirmation. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Gary, because it was definitely Gary, reached the generator, unscrewed the cap, and started to pour. That's when Harper flipped the switch. A red laser dot appeared right over Gary's chest. He froze like someone had hit pause on a bad movie. Hands where I can see 'em, I said from 10 feet behind him, rifle level, safety still on, but very real. He spun, panicked, sloppy, and ran straight into the wire snare we'd set for coyotes. His legs flipped out from under him, the jerry can went flying, and he hit the dirt with a thud and a curse loud enough to startle an owl. We secured him, called the sheriff, and kept the cameras rolling. Deputy Owens arrived 12 minutes later with backup. When they yanked off Gary's ski mask and saw his stupid, sunburned face, nobody looked surprised. He didn't say a word as they cuffed him and shoved him into the cruiser. But he didn't have to. The can, the trap, the footage, it all spoke louder than any confession. Owens turned to me and said, "We're issuing a warrant for Karen Whitmore first thing in the morning." And just like that, the storm shifted. By sundown, the rumor mill in Sunridge Hills was on fire. Karen was being investigated for criminal conspiracy, arson, and possibly obstruction. 6 board members called an emergency vote to remove her. Though she never showed up to the meeting, her house, empty. Her phone, disconnected. She was gone, but not silent. Because just as I was cleaning out the barn later that evening, a neighbor ran up to my gate waving a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" he asked, breathless. There on the front page, under a grainy photo of me holding Brutus as a pup, was the headline, "Veteran Rancher Accused of Terrorizing HOA Community in Fear." Karen had disappeared, but not before planting one last lie. I stared at that newspaper like it had personally insulted my mother. The article was a full-page hit piece, complete with grainy, unflattering photos and cherry-picked quotes from neighbors I hadn't even spoken to. Karen had spun the entire narrative on her way out of town, painting herself as a devoted community leader, forced into hiding by a militia agent landowner with a vendetta. There were even photos of her in a neck brace, sitting in what looked like a hotel conference room, dabbing her eyes with a tissue like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. The piece accused me of harassment, psychological warfare, and my personal favorite, weaponizing patriotism against progress. It was a masterclass in spin, and for a moment, I could feel the tide shift under my boots. The reaction came fast. A few neighbors who had once waved now looked away. One mom canceled her kids' pony lessons, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. A man at the gas station nodded toward me, then changed lanes. It wasn't open hostility, but it was ice in places that had once been lukewarm. Karen may have vanished, but her smear campaign lingered like smoke after a house fire. Clara warned me it might get worse before it got better. "He's cornered," she said. "This is her last shot. Make you the villain so her charges look like self-defense. We're filing a motion to dismiss the defamation case immediately, but you need to get ahead of this publicly." I wasn't thrilled about going public, but I wasn't about to let my name be dragged through the mud by a woman who once tried to fine a neighbor for hanging wind chimes. That's when Greg Powell stepped up again, this time with an idea. "You know what you need?" he said, sitting on my porch with a can of root beer. "A camera, a real one. Tell your story. People trust faces more than court filings." Turns out his niece Savannah ran a growing independent YouTube channel, local investigations, human interest stuff, nothing flashy. She came by that weekend, polite, sharp-eyed, and surprisingly good at letting me talk without feeling like I was being interviewed. We filmed everything, drone footage of the land, the charred remains of the barn, the legal documents, the video of Karen's crew breaking the lock, even an old voicemail where she told a neighbor I was a threat to organized harmony. Savannah cut it all together with clarity and just the right amount of dry humor. The title? "The HOA tried to evict a rancher, then found out he owned their voting land." It hit 1 million views in 2 days. By the end of the week, it was over 3 million. The comment section exploded. "This is like Yellowstone meets Judge Judy. Karen needs to be in jail, not a neck brace." The way he kept his cool, absolute legend. People started showing up at the gate. Not to protest, but to drop off pies, cookies, and handshakes. Lisa, the woman who'd once brought me a blueberry pie after the letter incident, came by with her teenage son and asked if he could help muck the stalls. My kid wants to learn from someone who doesn't back down, she said. I don't cry often, but my voice caught in my throat that day. Sometimes justice doesn't come in court papers. It comes in casseroles. Karen's lawyer tried to get the video taken down, filing a claim that it was retaliatory and defamatory. The judge ruled it protected under free speech. And just when things seemed like they might finally level out, Clara got a call from the district attorney's office. Ethan, he said, her voice firm, they're moving forward with full criminal charges against Karen. Not just arson, but conspiracy, fraud, and evidence tampering. She deleted surveillance footage from the HOA building 3 days before it burned. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but even then I knew it wasn't the end, because with Karen, the final chapter doesn't close quietly. It slams. In 2 weeks before the trial, it did just that, with headlights in the night, a silent camera feed, and the last person I ever wanted to see stepping out of a black SUV. The night she came back was darker than usual, one of those Colorado nights where the sky folds in on itself and the silence is thick enough to choke on. I'd been on the porch trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace, nursing a beer and watching the tree line like it owed me an apology. My camera feed was running, phone on the armrest beside me, but around 11:38 p.m., everything cut out. Every camera, every sensor, offline. I blinked at the screen, tried refreshing, but nothing. That had never happened before, not even during the flare incident. I stood slowly, flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other, and scanned the perimeter. That's when I saw the black SUV parked just beyond the fence, lights off, engine still running. The driver's door cracked open with a soft click, and out stepped Karen Whitmore. No pearls this time, no clipboard, just her hair pulled back into a frizzed bun, face pale under the porch light, eyes wild and unblinking. She looked like the ghost of HOA past. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and shaking, but full of something worse than anger. Certainty. You think you've won, don't you? I said nothing, just stood there still like the land itself. She stepped closer, crossing the line between public road and private dirt. I built that neighborhood, she hissed. I brought structure, order. You, she pointed a trembling finger at me, you brought chaos. You turned them against me. I raised my phone, bluffing. Sheriff's office is tracking this visit. You're violating bond terms. I suggest you back up. She froze. For a second, her bravado cracked, and I saw it. Fear. Karen didn't say another word. She turned, climbed back into the SUV, and peeled off into the night like a storm that had run out of thunder. But I knew better. Storms like her don't vanish. They regroup. The next morning, Clara called. Trial's moving forward, she said. Courtrooms already packed, local press, residents, even a few board members from neighboring HOAs. Everyone wants to see this end. And it did. Just not the way anyone expected. The evidence was airtight. Gary's arrest, the flare residue, the wire transfer, the deleted HOA footage. Greg testified. I testified. Owens testified. The prosecution built a wall out of facts, and Karen had no ladders left. Her defense team tried spinning her as overwhelmed, misguided, even emotionally manipulated by rogue board members. But the jury, they returned a verdict in less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Karen Whitmore was sentenced to 6 months in county jail, 4 years probation, and permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in the state of Colorado. When she was led out of the courthouse in cuffs, someone in the gallery started clapping. Others joined. I didn't. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I knew it wasn't over yet. After the trial, Sunridge Hills HOA collapsed under its own weight. Residents voted unanimously to dissolve the board and replace it with a volunteer neighborhood council. No fines, no drones, no clipboards. Greg was elected treasurer. Lisa runs community events now. They invited me to the first meeting as a guest of honor. I brought cinnamon rolls and a toolbox. Old habits die hard. As for the land, I donated the 5-acre parcel where the HOA headquarters once stood to a local veterans nonprofit. They broke ground on a new community center the following spring. No one asked what color it would be. No one cared. Kids ride ponies in the same barn Karen tried to burn down. Seniors host pancake breakfasts under the rebuilt roof. Every Saturday, someone drops off a thank you note, a pie, or a new hand-painted sign that says something like, "No Karens allowed past this point." In that photo Karen once left taped to my gate, the one of my ranch taken from inside her old HQ, with the words, "You should have stayed quiet," scrawled across the back in red marker. I keep it framed in the hallway next to my Army medals, not as a trophy, as a reminder that sometimes you don't need to shout. You just have to stand your ground, because when you own the land, the wind always shifts in your favor. So to anyone out there fighting a clipboard tyrant, a rogue HOA, or a Karen with a megaphone and too much time on her hands, keep your receipts, hold your line. And when they come for your peace, let them find a rancher, a camera, and a community that knows better. Now tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if this story gave you even a little justice, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs the reminder. The land always remembers who it belongs to. Sometimes the biggest battles don't happen overseas. They happen at your front gate, armed with bylaws, clipboards, and passive-aggressive newsletters. But standing your ground doesn't mean shouting louder. It means knowing the truth, holding the line, and letting facts speak when emotion runs wild. Karen didn't lose because I fought dirty. She lost because she underestimated what happens when good people get pushed too far. So if you're dealing with a Karen in your life, someone who abuses small power like it's a crown, remember this: justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks calmly, hands in pockets, with a deed in one hand and a camera in the other. Don't fold, don't flee. Just be the calm in their chaos. And if you play it smart, play it long, you just might find yourself drinking sweet tea while they argue with a deputy on your drive. Now that's karma with boots on.